Hello everyone, I'm Michael Saiger and welcome to my talk on health economics in games, playing with lives. This talk gives an overview of health economic principles and how we could adopt them in game studies. Just to tell you a little bit about who I am, I'm a second year iGGi student, so I've just completed my first year of iGGi. My research is principally investigating user involvement methods, things like participatory design, for the design of therapeutic games for phobias in young people. But a lot of research I've done around this so far considers considers a lot of research around economic evaluations around game for health. Previously researched at health economics at Glasgow Caledonian University, and that working as a QA and project management contractor has highlighted the importance of scope and cost, and this will come into play later. So firstly, what is health economics? Health considers the health services and the provision of health, where economics considers how society allocates resources among alternative uses. The role of health economics is to provide a way of thinking or a set of techniques which assist decision making in the healthcare sector. So why should you care about health economics as a game designer? Well, health economics is focused on methods to help make complex decisions, and with economics concerned about making these choices and decisions, these concepts can help with what makes a good choice. Preference elicitation methods could help with development roadmaps, for example, with limited time and money, where should we focus our time? And in the context of applied games, where public money is involved, it could help determine how that money should be spent. And some of you may already use these principles in design already, but I hope I can share some further depth on the use of these principles within games. So to give you some economic principles in brief that you may have heard of, you have trade-offs, which you might be familiar with, where to get one thing, we may have to give another thing up, similar to the concept of like meaningful choice. And next there's opportunity cost, which assigns a value to a cost decision, basically deciding whether the additional benefits that are offered are sufficient to justify any additional costs, critically on the value of what is given up by the others as a consequence. I know it sounds complicated. Don't worry, I will give a bit more detailed explanation about what this is. And then there's preference elicitation methods, as I mentioned before, which are methods to understand an individual's opinion on how resources are allocated. So what are these techniques? There are two methods to help allocate resources and understand public preferences: contingent valuation and discrete choice experiments. Contingent valuation uses survey-based methods to determine an individual's preferences, whereas discrete choice experiments present pairwise comparisons, so choosing between A or B, where participants choose between their preferred options. There are some concerns, though, on the effectiveness of these preference elicitation methods, which I will go into further. But first, some examples. Let's look at trade-offs, which are common to see in the concept of games. For example, let's just take Mass Effect here, where it presents trade-off choices throughout the series, where a decision is made that can impact the player's standing, number of companions, or even the overall narrative of the story. The player can't enact all choices, so they must make a trade-off. Similarly, roguelikes are another common example where trade-offs are employed. With Curse of the Dead Gods, the player chooses their path through the dungeon, often presented with 1 to 3 choices. They must choose their path but forgo the other options. Similarly, the shop system offers 3 options to the player, which they have to choose only from one, forgoing the other 2 options. In the context of applied games, choosing My Way by Dozen Eyes positions the player as a refugee in the US, where the player has to make trade-off decisions to how they lead their lives. So I said I was going to come back around to it, but opportunity cost is a difficult principle to wrap your head around. To illustrate this, here's this example. Suppose you won a free ticket to develop Live tomorrow, or develop Brighton. You can't resell it. However, the iGGi conference is on the same night, and that's the only other activity you're considering. iGGi conference tickets cost about £40, and on any given day, you'd be willing to pay £50 to go. The only thing you're sacrificing to attend Develop Live tomorrow is attending the iGGi conference by not is the iGGi conference, and by not attending iGGi, you miss out on an event that could have been worth £50 to you. But you also avoid having to spend the £40 for the iGGi conference. So the value of what you give up by not attending iGGi is the £50 of what you'd be willing to pay, take away from the actual cost of £10. Therefore, if Develop Live tomorrow is worth at least £10 to you, you should probably go. Otherwise, you should attend iGGi. To try some examples in games, there are a few examples where opportunity cost is kind of applicable. Spent is a browser tool game where the player has to make cost decisions on a fictional life in low income. In the example above, it sort of simulates opportunity cost of what you as a person would assign as the main cost to you. The cost in this case is the transport or rent. Which one do you value more? Which is one you're more willing to sacrifice? Another example I've drawn up here is an opportunity cost can be seen with the release of new games or games content to a player. A player may be given a free key to New World beta, but only on one weekend. However, that same weekend could be the release of a new Dota 2 update where the player is eager to play competitively. The opportunity cost here could maybe be valued as time, as the player may have to make a choice between their time. If a weekend isn't a lot of game time lost to a player, then they should probably play New World. They've got plenty of time to catch up on the Dota thing. But if that time is a lot to the player and it's valued a bit higher, they should probably stick with Dota 2. So what bit about these contingent valuation methods? Willingness to pay is one of these examples, and this is determining the maximum amount an individual would pay to obtain a product or service. Usually the amount is altered to work out the moment when you change your preference. An example in health economics could be asking members of the public how much they would pay for a home testing kit for cancer. The survey would ask a baseline value, and depending on how you answer, the amount would increase or decrease through the survey valuation to determine what you would value for that specific attribute. So in the example I've given here, let's say I asked you if you would pay £50 and you said no, and you would drop down to £40 and you said yes, and then increase back up to like 45 to kind of determine what is the maximum threshold you would be willing to pay. So contingent valuation, like Williams Fair, could play a big part in marketing within games, or even in AI determining difficult choices. For example, the marketing DLC, willingness to pay could be used to determine the perceived value for new content. An example here is the Horsehammer DLC from the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Willingness to pay could be used as a method to measure and understand preferences to paying for extra content. It could be used to determine the preferences for season passes and in-game currency, therefore trying to get a better understanding of the kind of player base and what they're spending on. In the context of applied games, again bringing this back down to the sort of development roadmap and helping out scope and cost, willingness to pay could help allocate the value to a game for understanding or coping with loss. Take like an example like that Dragon Cancer by Numinous Games. To determine whether a specific audience would purchase this game or donate so much to charity, they could try and understand how much would the value a game like this. That Dragon actually Cancer retails at $9.99. Alternatively, from a development perspective, willingness to pay could be help communicate these development costs to clients to let them know that what are your expectations versus reality and what's actually feasible with the given amount of money. The other form of preference solicitation are discrete choice experiments, which tell us the preference of a respondent when deciding between a series of comparisons. In this example here, the questions asked maybe determine social societal preferences for a new painkiller. These questions don't directly ask a yes or no question, but ask discrete questions to help understand that public preferences. So they don't just ask, would you like a new painkiller, yes or no? They try to determine things like, if the painkiller took like 30 minutes to take effect, that when they would then go ask people, how long should it take for the painkiller to take effect? It could be 5, 10, 15, 30, 60 minutes. What do they think is a reasonable amount of time? And this would help sort of understand the people's preferences towards something that may be like a new painkiller. This obviously could be applied in games research as a new different form of methodology where we could present a new quantitative approach to sampling preferences in user research. For example, in applied games, surveying participants for a healthy eating game by asking design questions like how long should the healthy eating games last, the tasks to complete, levels to complete, and how should the information be presented to younger people or people with children with these healthy eating habits. However, there are challenges to eliciting preferences within health economics, such as uncertainty with resource allocation, because resource allocation is a complex task. It's to do with everything I've just gone over about opportunity cost and more. The series of pairwise comparisons that you used in things like opportunity cost, in things like preference elicitation, is quite a difficult thing to get your head around, and it's also then quite difficult for public members to understand it. And I think this is something games can help with. Participants are not engaged during preference solicitation. It's survey evaluation. You're repeatedly bombarding the same question over and over again. And how do you know that's gathering an accurate preference? And then this links into the idea that people with lived experience can they actually provide an accurate preference? And this is the idea that a preference is informed. That would you ask someone who's never had any experience or anybody known with dementia to certainly evaluate dementia treatment? It just feels wrong. Because they're making judgments on something they don't understand. So how do we address these challenges to eliciting preferences? Well, through games, they can present complex scenarios. We can present like resource systems and how to balance them in games like Frostpunk. Games can also be goal-oriented to drive players towards specific resource allocation. Not to mention the ability to educate users from different perspectives, to put them in the shoes of someone else, or to put them in a state of like someone who's making these decisions across a broad group. Take this example with Killbox by the Biome Collective, where players are positioned in one of two roles. They're either a drone pilot or a civilian on the ground, and this is done in order to communicate the gamified appearance of drone warfare. So apologies for rushing through this a bit, but in summary, there are challenges to health economics that game design and game studies can address. However, there are techniques used in health economics that really could benefit game design as well. Stated preference methods could be used to design more interesting choices, but also aid in scope and production of games, specifically in applied games. And preference solicitation tasks are complex and difficult, but I'm hoping that games moving into this area will be able to help kind of bridge this gap and show the kind of narrative of these people, what people go through, and help communicate how to basically allocate these resources. An opportunity cost is a difficult thing to present to the public. It's okay giving an illustrated example, but it needs more visual communication to show what actually people are sacrificing when they allocate resources. And I think games can present a visual understanding of what is lost. Thank you for your time. There's my socials if you need to know, and I'll happily take any questions.